There are not that many 7-seater SUVs out there in the market, let alone if you're looking for a hybrid. But today we're looking at the Hyundai Santa Fe, which is available as a traditional hybrid or indeed a plug-in hybrid, and we'll be focusing on the latter. Now, at the time of filming and in the UK, it's available in 3 trims. You've got the Premium, which starts at roughly £52,000, the Ultimate, which we have on review, that can be found for roughly £55,000, and then the Calligraphy that can be found for roughly £57,500. Now, that's roughly a £2,000 premium over the equivalent 4-wheel drive hybrid. Yes, indeed, the plug-in hybrid models are all a 4-wheel drive configuration, while the regular hybrid model is also available as a 2-wheel drive, therefore meaning that prices start from £47,000 and extends up to £55,000. Now, the Santa Fe comes with a 5-year unlimited mileage warranty, 5 years worth of annual checks, and a 12-year anti-proliferation warranty. Now, in this review, which we cover in such a format, I'll be seeing if the plug-in hybrid model is actually worth its price tag, and of course how it compares to some of its key competitors. So let us kick off and talk about efficiency. And here in the plug-in hybrid models, you've got a 47-litre fuel tank. However, this moves up to 67 litres in the regular hybrid models. Now, nonetheless, in the PHEV variant that I'm actually driving, I was able to notice roughly 350 miles on a full tank of petrol. Now, in terms of its electric range, it's sat between 30 to 35 miles and is actually pretty much on par with what the manufacturer claims, which sits at roughly 33 miles. So combining this, that means you've got roughly 380 miles of driving range, combining electric and also petrol power. Now, in terms of the overall fuel efficiency itself, I netted 40 to 45 mpg in my mixed driving test, and that also includes driving in and around the city, on the country roads and on the motorway. Now, as you'll be able to see from the mileage leaderboard, it doesn't exactly stand out with some other electrified SUVs out there in the market, although it's actually pretty comparable with the other 7-seater hybrid which I've reviewed, and that's the Nissan X-Trail, which pretty much netted the same sort of result. In essence, over here, the Santa Fe is on par with what you would expect, although some people, including myself, might expect a little bit better, given that it is a very modern vehicle and also Hyundai's pedigree in the electrified market. Another area where I'd really expect a bit more from the Hyundai Motor Group is when it comes to regenerative braking. And it's not in terms of customization, because it's certainly there. You have got the paddle shifters that are found behind the steering wheel, which allow you to adjust the regenerative braking feel on the fly. So right now I'm on level 3 mode, and if I were to lift off, the vehicle will start decelerating pretty harshly. However, if I don't want that, on the fly I can adjust it. So let's say if I go on level 1 mode or even level 0 mode, if I lift off, the vehicle will actually start coasting a bit more. And you can also initiate auto mode by holding down the right side paddle shifter and therefore going via the setting that can be found via the infotainment system. And you've also got a max mode as such. So right now, if I go back onto the level modes, go on to level 3 mode, and if I were to lift off at 20 miles an hour and then hold the left side paddle shifter, the vehicle will come to a complete standstill. So not quite one pedal drive, but one paddle shifter drive. So it's nice to see that level of customization. However, when it comes to actual practicality, I do feel that the brakes are a little bit grabby when it comes to regenerative braking, which is not really what I would expect with a vehicle when it comes to the Hyundai Motor Group, because normally they absolutely nail it. See, right now, if I'm driving at 30 miles an hour, I lift off, and it's now decelerating. It's not an instant deceleration like you'd come to expect, and therefore makes it feel a little bit unpredictable and feel a little bit odd when it comes to having that sensation of indeed having that deceleration that's done automatically for you. I just wish that it was a bit more in line with some of the fully electric vehicles that Hyundai produce, because I feel that not only with the customization but also the regenerative braking feel, well, it's done to perfection. But alas, that's not quite the case with the Santa Fe. In terms of the braking performance, you have got 325mm ventilated disc brakes, both at the front and at the rear. And right now I'm just going to accelerate up to roughly 40, 50 miles an hour and then hit the brakes hard. The vehicle really does come to a standstill really quickly. So yes, indeed, you have got good level of braking performance within this vehicle, despite its overall size. Now, this does actually bring me on to the overall driving comfort. And here you have got self-leveling suspension and a MacPherson setup at the front and a multi-link configuration at the rear. Now, the combination means that it is actually relatively soft when you're just simply pottering around town. However, I did find that when it came to driving over more challenging routes, the suspension system felt a little bit wobbly, and there was also a slight bit of an odd rebound when it came to dealing with speed bumps. For example, when you're driving in and around London, there's plenty of them, and I just felt a little bit more uncomfortable. So in some ways, the vehicle is quite soft and therefore does feel pretty nice when you're just gliding over certain bumps, but when it comes to dealing with roads that are a bit more challenging, the vehicle really struggles and therefore can't quite compete with others out there that have got more advanced suspension systems. So for example, the Citroen C5X Hybrid feels like a completely league above because it just provides a completely floating like suspension system. And granted, that's not a 7-seater and it's not as big as the Santa Fe, but in terms of the hybrid SUV market, the Santa Fe wouldn't be my pick when it comes to the overall driving comfort. Similarly, when it comes to the overall handling characteristics, even in terms of its sport mode preset, it just doesn't have that sense of connection on the road. You feel a little bit disjointed with the front axle, and the vehicle does suffer from quite a bit of body lean, but that's almost no surprise given the overall size of the Santa Fe. And if sporty nature is something that you're really looking forward to, then you might want to look at a more compact electrified SUV instead. This perfectly brings me on to performance, and at the front you've got a 1.6 litre turbocharged 4-cylinder petrol engine, which combines with the electric motor and the battery pack to output 186 kilowatts of power or 250 horsepower. You've also got 367 newton meters of torque. It's actually the most powerful in the Santa Fe lineup within the UK, and as a reminder, the plug-in hybrid model has got a 4-wheel drive configuration, therefore giving it pretty good traction. Now, using RaceLogic's Performance Box Touch, I had it tested from 0 to 20 miles an hour in 1.79 seconds, 0 to 30 miles an hour in 2.81 seconds, 0 to 60 miles an hour in just 7.51 seconds, which is far better than the manufacturer's 0 to 62 mile an hour claim of 9.3 seconds, and then 50 to 70 miles an hour in 3.95 seconds, and also record a peak acceleration of 0.6 Gs. The vehicle is also electronically limited to 112 miles an hour. Now, it's worth pointing out over here that the 6-speed automatic transmission is buttery smooth, although the same couldn't be quite said about the shift between electric and petrol power, where I noted at certain times there was a little bit of hesitation, namely when you're going to be applying power when you're on the motorway, for example, and therefore when it has to go from electric to petrol power, there's sometimes a little bit of a delay, which is a little bit disappointing because the vast majority of its competitors are really buttery smooth in this department, and therefore I was expecting a little bit better from the Hyundai Motor Group. Next up, we get onto its interior design, and here I really do love what Hyundai have achieved with the Santa Fe. Not only does it look the part with the use of materials that have been chosen around the dashboard, the door frames, and also in terms of the upholstery work and also the stitching, it does also have a very practical feel to it, which isn't the same that could be said about the vast majority of its competitors. Because here you've got physical buttons and dials on the steering wheel, traditional stalks, and yes, a rotary gear selector, which does take a little bit of getting used to, but once you get your head around it, it does actually become second nature in comparison to a traditional gear selector that you'd find towards the center console. And this is because the center console area has got some extra space to play around with, and thankfully over here the manufacturer has included a dedicated climate control menu. Now, the buttons themselves are not physical, and indeed over here are touch based, and there's no sort of haptic feedback. But still, in terms of when it comes to usability and practicality, it means you don't have to faff around with the infotainment system. And yes, you still have got 2 physical knobs for your temperature, and therefore makes it quite intuitive for both the passengers to adjust the climate within the cabin. Then you've also got a few physical buttons that serve as shortcuts and can be used for the infotainment system. You can also customize the knobs, in other words, the volume that can be from the left or on the right side. So again, good little thinking by the manufacturer, but one that certainly does go far when it comes to the overall usability of the vehicle on a day-to-day basis. Speaking of which, you've also got a 12.3-inch display that's slightly angled towards the driver. The infotainment system itself is very comprehensively laid out and provides you all the right options that you'll require. It's also fantastic to see that you've got both Android Auto and Apple CarPlay, which are supported over a wired and a wireless transmission. It is also great that these third-party mobile operating systems feed through navigation data straight to the instrument cluster, which sits at also a 12.3-inch size. The instrument cluster itself is somewhat customizable, and you can go through different themes or indeed link it to your drive mode. Now, as an extension to this, in the Ultimate and the Calligraphy trims, you've also got a head-up display, which effectively projects your traversing speed and the safety systems that are in operation directly in front of you, therefore keeping your eyes planted on the road and bolstering safety. And it's also fantastic to see that Hyundai have optimized the technology within the cabin by integrating turn-based navigation, which also feeds through via the third-party mobile operating systems directly via the head-up display. Now, speaking of which, here in these two trims, you'll also have a digital rear view mirror, which can be quite handy, for example, if you've got quite a few different occupants that are sat behind you, namely adults, and therefore means that it can be quite hard to look at your rear view mirror. Thankfully over here with the digital integration, it means that you can still see your surroundings, be it if you're parking or indeed driving. And yes, it's quite handy both in normal lighting conditions and also at night. Now elsewhere, you've also got a pretty punchy 12-speaker Bose audio system that actually does pretty well across the sound frequency range, and the inclusion of a subwoofer in the boot does give you a pretty good low-end shunt. In fact, if you want a detailed breakdown of the audio system itself, make sure you check out my dedicated audio review that can be found up on your pop-up banner or by following the links down in the description below or the pinned comments. Now in the top spec trim, you'll also find a UVC area, which effectively is a sterilization part which can be found just above the glove box. So it's nice thinking by the manufacturer. For example, if you've got gloves, a smartphone or anything like that you just want sterilized, then you can do this via UV. Now in the other trims, this will actually be a normal area where it allows you to store your goods. This actually does bring me onto storage, and it's actually absolutely excellent within the cabin. First off, you've got the glove box, which has been optimized for right-hand drive vehicles, and it's also pretty sizable too. As for the center console, you've got a singular wireless charging bay in the entry-level model, and this moves over to 2 wireless charging bays in the Ultimate and above. It's also got some non-slip material, which means that no matter the size of your smartphone, it won't exactly be sliding about. Then here you'll also find 2 USB Type-C ports, one of which is interchangeable for you to provide charge or indeed connect up to the infotainment system. Further down you've got 2 cup holders, and then you've also got a bilateral opening armrest, which I absolutely love. This means that it's not only accessible for the front occupants but also for the rear occupants. This makes it very practical on those longer journeys, especially with families, and means that you can actually store quite a lot of things within this area because it's actually pretty big as well. You've even got a small little tray giving you that degree of separation. Speaking of which, at the rear of the center console, you've also got a pull-out area which allows you to store further goods. Now underneath the center console there's also a large open area, and it's also been lined in a non-slip material which prevents loose change or keys from rattling about. There's a 12-volt socket over here that provides charge to, for example, a dash cam. It is a shame, however, that all the door bins haven't been lined in any sort of fabric. However, the front two are actually pretty large and will accommodate a 500ml bottle with ease, and while the rear two are a little bit more limited, there is also additional cup holders, which is actually quite a rarity. There's further 2 cup holders that can be found in the pull-down armrest compartment. Elsewhere, you also find 2 USB Type-C ports, one on each side within the inner part of the front seat, therefore making it handy for the rear occupants. And there are also 2 further USB Type-C ports for the third row occupants. Here there's also a small little storage area and some cup holders, which is definitely a great sort of inclusion by the manufacturer, as it adds to the overall practicality and usability for all the occupants that are sat within the Santa Fe. Speaking of which, if you're not going to be using the third row, you might want to fold these seats flat because you've got 621 litres to play around with, or a whopping 1,942 litres if you drop down the second row as well. It's absolutely humongous, although not quite class leading. Still, it should certainly suffice for the vast majority of consumers, namely if you're using it as a 5-seater configuration. Now there is also an electric tailgate that comes fitted as standard across the entire trim range with a hatchback design. As someone who's just under 6 foot, I had no issues when it came to accessing the rear portion of the vehicle. It's also nice to see that you've got a flat loading bay with 50-50 rear split folding third row seats and 60-40 rear split folding second row seats. It's also pretty practical in order to drop them, and you've also got a small little underfloor compartment which will suffice for taking your tyre repair kit. Although unfortunately over here there's no means of stowing away the removable and retractable boot load cover, which I do think is a slight oversight by the manufacturer. Elsewhere, you can expand on storage by having a roof box fitted. Or alternatively, in terms of towing capacity, it's rated at 750 kilograms for unbraked trailers and 1,110 kilograms for brake trailers. I do think that the latter figure is actually quite underwhelming, specifically if compare and contrast it with some of its key competitors. So moving on, we get onto seat and comfort. And first off, in terms of the overall finish, you have got a leather in all the trims, although this moves over to Nappa leather in the top spec model. And yes, it certainly very much feels premium. Now, the front seats are electronically adjustable and heated, and have also got an electric lumbar support. It's also worth mentioning that the steering wheel also comes heated across the entire trim range. If, however, you want two-way lumbar support for the driver, a memory function, ventilated front seats, and rear heated seats, you'll have to go for the Ultimate or the Calligraphy trims. The top spec model also brings relaxation seats. Now, as for headroom and legroom, it's absolutely excellent, both at the front and within the second row. I had no issues whatsoever as someone who's just under 6 foot. It's also nice to see that the rear footwell design has been optimized, therefore meaning that if you do have a fifth occupant, they won't be left uncomfortable. Now, of course, you have also got that third row. Unsurprisingly, it's a little bit more limited for those people who are adults, but for children, it should suffice. Just bear in mind, legroom is a little bit limited. Thankfully, it can be expanded to a certain degree because the second row can be brought forwards, and has also got a reclining function if you just want to add to an extra bit of space for the third row occupants. So it's good thinking by the manufacturer, and it's also very accessible as well, because there's a simple one-touch button which effectively will shove the second row seats all the way forwards, therefore making it very easy to jump in and jump out even if you're sat within the third row. Now, it's worth highlighting over here that in the Calligraphy trim, you've also got a 6-seat combination, therefore giving you armrests. This, however, will cost you £1,000. It is disappointing, however, that in all the plug-in hybrid models, you've got no sunroof option, while it is actually present in the Ultimate and above trims in the regular hybrid model. It would have been great to see this present in the plug-in hybrid model, however, that's not the case. Next up, we get onto its exterior design, and I'd be curious to know what you make of it down in the comment section below. There's certain things that I really do love and also hate about it. First off, on the former, the overall profile of the vehicle is very much fitting, and in comparison to the previous generation vehicles, I do love what Hyundai have actually achieved over here, because it not only looked quite futuristic, but also has got that sort of robust feel on the road. A lot of people have actually commented about how they love the look of the vehicle, specifically in terms of its sidle profile. Now, at the front, I do like the H illuminated headlights, and you've also got a really nice grille design, which really does give it a kind of more muscular feel. Towards the side, you haven't got body-coloured wheel arches or side skirts, but that doesn't really bother me too much given the overall class of the vehicle, and you've got 20-inch alloys that come fitted as standard. Yes, indeed, they are pretty large, but it very much is fitting with the rest of the vehicle. However, the rear look of the vehicle, in my opinion, is actually quite ugly, and I do think this is because the way that the glass has been designed. It kind of reminds me of an oversized forehead, but of course it's all subjective and some people might not mind it, but from my survey of asking different individuals, from the general public to my family and friends, a lot of them have actually agreed that the rear just kind of looks a little bit off-putting, so maybe Hyundai could go back to the drawing board with the second generation model, or potentially a sort of facelift. Now, in terms of the overall colour options, metallic paint finishes will cost you an additional £700, a special metallic paint finish will cost you £900, while a matte finish will set you back £1,200. Given the vehicle's size, you might actually expect it to be really safe on the road, and while it has got 4 out of 5 stars by Euro NCAP, it hasn't got the full 5 out of 5 stars, scoring 84% in adult occupancy, 83% in child occupancy, and 69% in its safety assist scores. Now, while I can't really overly comment about crash safety, I can talk about the driver assistance systems. And here, as standard, you've got forward collision avoidance, highway driver assist, intelligent speed limit assist, lane follow assist, lane keep assist, driver status monitor, and adaptive cruise control with stop and go technology, which actually does work a treat by keeping you at a safe distance for the leading vehicle without feeling jerky either. You can also customize the overall behavior via the infotainment system, which is certainly appreciated. Then the Ultimate and the Calligraphy trims, you've also got Highway Drive Assist 2.0, which effectively gives you steering support and even better confidence on the motorway, Blind Spot Collision Avoidance Assist, and Blind Spot View Monitor, which effectively integrates the camera-based system directly via the instrument cluster, giving you extra peace of mind when you're indicating and checking for your blind spot. Then you've also got Parking Collision Avoidance Assist. Now, it is worth pointing out that due to certain regulations, some of the driver assistance systems will become re-enabled every single time you power on the vehicle, no matter the last used setting. But thankfully, Hyundai have actually thought about it. By long pressing the volume wheel on the steering wheel, it'll disable the speed limit warning, while long pressing the steering wheel icon will disable the lane keep assist. And this can be quite handy in certain scenarios. Furthermore, you can also program the star icon on the steering wheel to take you directly to the driver assistance settings, and therefore means that, for example, if you want to disable the driver alert warning, then you can do so via this sort of means. There's also a secondary star icon that can be found via the dashboard, and here you have got another physical button which can be also programmed. In my case, I actually had that button programmed to go to phone projection, in other words, launching up Android Auto or Apple CarPlay. Speaking of which, further down the center console, you'll find a dedicated button to initiate the camera-based system, which can be handy, for example, when you're entering a parking lot and you just want to quickly check your surroundings. Now, this actually brings me on to visibility, and at the front, I've got no issues whatsoever. It's very easy to peer over the bonnet. As for the side, you've got these really nice wide openings and also relatively slender A-pillars for a large size vehicle. At the rear, you have got a really wide window, as I did mention before, when it comes to its exterior design, and that certainly has its advantages when it comes to reversing. Although here, you will be able to note that if there are certain individuals that are sat behind you, then it can be a little bit hard to peer over your shoulder. Thankfully, however, you have got front and rear parking sensors and also a reversing camera. The Ultimate and the Calligraphy trims also add side sensors and a 360-degree surround view camera system, which also has got a really good resolution, therefore giving you even better peace of mind. Do remember, as I did mention before, you've also got that digital rear view mirror in the higher spec trims, therefore meaning that you can also initiate that if you so wish, even if you're going to be driving and therefore not exactly reversing. In terms of maneuverability, it's got an 11.6 meter turning circle, and the steering wheel does actually feel pretty light, therefore making it very easy to do a 3-point turn in a very short space of time. So with all that in mind, it brings us on to a verdict of the Hyundai Santa Fe, or more specifically the plug-in hybrid model. Now, it does really tick quite a few boxes, although its exterior design is somewhat like Marmite. Some people are going to love it, some people are going to hate it. Inside, you've got a really nice, stylish interior, and it's one that's very practical as well, with a dedicated climate control menu and some physical buttons, which is somewhat of a rarity these days. And you've also got good use of technology, not only in terms of the infotainment and the instrument cluster and the head-up display where appropriate with the relevant trims, but also a fantastic suite of driver assistance systems. In terms of the rear occupancy space, both headroom and legroom has been optimized for the second row occupants, and third row is unsurprisingly a little bit more limited, but should certainly suffice for those people that have got younger children. In terms of boot capacity, it is pretty good, at least if you were to drop down the third row, and of course if you were to drop down the second row, then you have actually got plenty of space to play around with. Now, the biggest talking points, at least for me, are the overall fuel efficiency, which is not exactly class leading, and while it is quite comparable with some of the other 7-seater hybrids out there on the market, I think Hyundai could have actually done a little bit of a better job. In terms of the overall driving comfort, I do think it's got a little bit of an odd suspension setup, which doesn't really match the vehicle itself. Then add to that you've got a little bit more of a steeper price tag in comparison to some of its nearest competitors, and it just kind of leaves you begging the question, is this vehicle actually worth its price tag? Well, truthfully, if you want something that's very stylish and ticks quite a few boxes, but then you've got the budget to play around with, then go for the Santa Fe. If not, consider some of the alternatives, such as the likes of the Nissan X-Trail, which is also available as a 7-seater. If you don't need a 7-seater, however, and you're still looking for a hybrid vehicle, then there are plenty of alternatives out there, from the Skoda Kodiaq IV to the likes of the Citroen C5X Hybrid or the Peugeot 408 Hybrid, among a few others. Some of which I've reviewed and would recommend will be down in the description below for your own consideration. Now, I'd be curious to know what you make of the Santa Fe down in the comment section below, and if you would pick it and why would you pick it over some of the alternatives. Now, if you have enjoyed this detailed independent review, definitely do consider dropping a like, subscribing and hitting that bell notification, all of which would be greatly appreciated. As such, I've been Chris from TotallyEV, and I'll hopefully see you in the next one. Take care of yourselves and goodbye.